Welcome wherever you are in the world. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to a star-studded panel that is going to address the issue of financing a nature-positive world. In a moment, I will introduce our panelists and ask them some very searching questions about a fundamental aspect of how the objectives of 30 by 30 of the Biodiversity Convention and generally on how to be able to look at the future with a positive outlook on nature is going to translate in the economies of today. I will moderate this session. My name is Achim Steiner. I lead the United Nations Development Program, and it is my pleasure to now introduce the panel, and I will begin with President Duque. President Duque, President of Colombia, also the official champion of the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, and also the host of the pre-COP on biodiversity that took place last August in Leticia, in Colombia, in the Amazon. President Duque, you have led your nation not only through enormous reforms and transformations, you have also led it through a pandemic. You have often had to confront that term of fiscal space and the ability of governments to, on the one hand, invest, on the second, to incentivize investments in nature-positive solutions. So let me simply ask you, from the years in which you have now held, so to speak, the helm of government in Colombia, what are some of the most intriguing lessons that you have taken away from trying to balance the competing demands in every society, in every economy, and at the same time the imperative of trying to find another way in which our economy relates to nature? Over to you.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here with you, Erna, Carlos, Zdenka, James, and obviously Professor Steer, and the people who are following us this morning. I think the challenge that we all face is that, yes, we have been dealing, in fact, with a pandemic that has affected the economy, employment, and even has produced effects, negative effects, on the way we move towards the 2030 agenda. But I think something that we realized since the beginning is that we had to manage the crisis without losing, also very important. And definitely, I think we all have to be clear that climate action is something that cannot be put aside, even though you're facing the pandemic. And we're clear that the world has been producing 51 billion tons of CO2 per year. And what the pandemic has demonstrated is that even though we changed the human interaction for a year, the effects on the emissions has not been substantial. That means the action has to be bolder, faster, and you need to integrate this with a big commitment. So we defined that we will be getting to Glasgow with reducing 51% of our greenhouse gases emissions by that year. We said that we want to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, but we have to be nature positive. And especially in a country that is the second country with more biodiversity after Brazil, and especially considering that 50% of our soil is tropical jungle and that 35% of our soil is Amazonic land, we definitely have to expand protected areas. We have to promote the restoration of ecosystems that have been affected, and we need to move forward with planting something close to 180 million trees by August next year. That has been part of the agenda. But all that takes resources, and all that needs to be balled on the reform process. We said clearly that we wanted to do the most important social and fiscal reform in this century in Colombia, and it was approved by Congress last week. What are we doing with that? Increasing income by 1.8% of GDP on a structural basis, but at the same time, we're, for the first time in Colombia, having free public university education for the emerging middle class and the poorest of the poor. We're subsidizing 25% of the minimum wage to hire youngsters between 18 and 28. That is the equivalent of paying for the Social Security. We have a basic income that will last until December 2022 to support the lowest income families. We're talking about more than 3 million households in Colombia. And definitely, we're doing on the environmental side the 5 biggest, boldest actions in Colombia's history. Expanding renewables, non-conventional renewables, moving forward with clean mobility, extending the protected areas, improving the circular economy, and something that in our case, it's also making a difference, creating nature-based solutions and making the commitment of 30 by 30. And if I may connect this with this meeting, what we have seen today is the boldest move ever by philanthropy around the world to mobilize $5 billion that will be used worldwide to protect ecosystems. So Colombia has the agenda, faces the pandemic, but has put nature conservation as a cornerstone of human and national development.
Thank you, President Duque. And perhaps one of the interesting phenomena in the midst of this pandemic and the horrendous economic and social impacts that it has had is that societies have found within themselves the ability to address things that often were long overdue, whether it was the issues of inequality, of exclusion, but also investments in accelerating the transformation, the systemic transformation. And let me turn to President Alvarado of Costa Rica. In a sense, being the president of Costa Rica is a very nice thing because you have generations of who have gone before you, who have built, in a sense, a vision for Costa Rica that thought about nature-based solutions, about an ecological infrastructure that underpins an economy well ahead of most countries in the rest of the world. So today, you are also leading a country in the midst of extremely challenging economic circumstances. How do you maintain the momentum? What can a government do in order to continue to build, first of all, on this remarkable record that Costa Rica has shown to the world is possible, but still advancing and building that economy of the future also? Please, President.
Thank you, Achim, and thank you all for being here. Well, actually, being president of Costa Rica is a blessing, but also is a burden. Why? Because it's true that we have built on a legacy of conservation and of sustainability that dates from decades. But the question is, if you're going to be true to that legacy, you just not need to preserve that legacy, you need to take it to the next level. And actually, current world situation and the climate situation and the crisis that the planet is facing urge us to move actually to a next level. For example, in the case of Costa Rica, electricity is 99.5% clean and renewable. But yet again, you need to transform your transportation matrix from fossil fuels to electric. In the case of conservation, for example, currently we have more than 25% of our territory protected. So in land, we're pretty close to achieving the 30% to be the 30 by 30. But the real challenge in our case, it's the ocean. Even though all of our accomplishments in the past, we have only protected less than 3% of our oceans. And the relevant part is that, and this many people won't know, Costa Rica, its territory, it's only 8% on the land. 92% of our territory is ocean. So for the past 3 years, we've been working really hard, not only in our decarbonization plan, but to preserve 30% of our oceans departing from the Cocos Island, this unique and very important ecosystem. And we are very close to achieve that protection of 30% of our ocean, which in size and scale will be the equivalent of our land territory. That's how big this is. And this will be our contribution, a next step to the conservation of ecosystems. And well, this is how we'll be moving, but also is key to find a sustainable, appropriate finance, which we are working to make this happen. And also to recruit allies, because this will be a clear step that the High Ambition Coalition that now unites more than 70 countries can actually achieve. Imagine, Achim, that if Costa Rica, one country, can achieve that 30%, we'll be saying to the other 70 and to the other 191, yes, it's possible to do it.
And you brought that pledge in 2019 with Costa Rica, and you are together with UK and France, the leaders amongst the High Ambition Coalition also for nature and for people. So let me for a moment make the connection to another country that in the eyes of many is a a country that has often pioneered approaches that try to reconcile a view of human development that is ambitious, has equity written into it, and at the same time has always been proud of the link to nature. And Norway remains a country with extraordinary natural assets. But Prime Minister, having led a government and having seen the dilemmas, and also having been with Norway a very significant player on the international stage, for example, with sometimes bringing significant finance to help other countries also overcome this financing challenge, what are some of the lessons that you would say to anybody who is now discussing financing and nature as a way forward? Because we still are far from where we need to be.
Well, I really do believe that you cannot talk about any of the SDGs alone. You can't talk about conserving nature without also remembering that people have to work. People need an income. People need a livelihood. So you have to connect this. And I think the scheme that really connects this is the Rainforest scheme that Norway has done for 12 years, where we pay for production to make sure that the countries are deforesting, that they are stopping the deforestation, and we are paying for the resource. And the payment is not money to the government, but in fact is to local community projects, creating other types of jobs as a part of development. And we think this is a very smart way of dealing with some of these treasures that you are responsible for in a way. It's your country, but it's also extremely important for the whole world. It's the lungs of the world. And we believe that that's one way of dealing with it and looking at how can we do that in more areas? How can we protect those areas that are so important to the whole world, to the whole ecosystem? But we're going to do that in different ways. We have a priority on oceans. We have formed up for the coalitions, both on ocean and on land, on 30%. But we do believe we need to manage sustainably 100%, because you can't not, put up the flag and say we have reached the 30% target if you are neighboring and in the neighbor area you are doing everything wrong. So that's why we have said, and the Ocean Panel for Sustainable Ocean Economy has said we should manage 100% in a sustainable way. And we are now working on how can you do that. So Norway have a lot of especially on fishery resources, a lot of knowledge, a lot of, and we've done this planning because of our oil and gas production in the ocean. We've done mapping, planning, and know how to do sort of a structural systems to make sure that you are evaluating the effects of all types of economic activity. And we now have a program that we are working with different countries who are just to make sure that they have the capacity in their administration to see the different areas. We have for a long time had a research vessel that only goes mainly in Africa to map resources of fisheries and in the waters in coalition with different governments. Now we are trying to make sure that they also can use this information so that we can have a sustainable management of ocean resources. And we have 7 times as big area in the oceans ourselves than we have and parts of it's Arctic, and we get the waste from the rest of the world, as I say. So we really see how interconnected we are. And that's why it's in our self-interest, as I usually say to my voters, it's our self-interest to work with other countries because their action are affecting us. So we should continue to finance. But you have to have that dialogue with the voters on financing, saying that it's in our interest because we are affected on the climate, we are affected on the ocean.
Well, and this is very often what I believe we need to come to, that we are investing in one another's ability to together change the trajectory of the world, which leads me to Andrew Steer, CEO, recently appointed, Andrew, of the Bezos Earth Fund. And Andrew, you have lived your life in this interface between high ambition on transformation of sustainability as a compass and this continuous challenge of financing. You now lead one of the largest philanthropic funds that are out there. And so share with us for a moment, what is the role of philanthropy going to be? I mean, is it an alternative to the public financing? Is it the fast-moving speedboat with EV motors, obviously, that are going to drive the innovation in finance. And I know you're also going to pick up on where President Duque just opened the curtain a little bit on this major announcement that is also being made by philanthropic financing today.
Well, look, thanks, Achim. Thanks to those who organized this event. As President Duque said, this is a pivot point. That happened than you ever hoped, and then they happened much more quickly than you imagined. We believe we are at such a point now. No, philanthropy is not to replace public money. It is to complement public money. We all have a part to play, and philanthropy has a very special responsibility. Philanthropy has the ability to act quickly, to be highly flexible. Doesn't mean philanthropy gives away its money without thinking. It is just as concerned about results and accountability as anybody else with their money, but they are able, as philanthropists, to make quick decisions. You may have seen the Bezos Earth Fund 2 days ago announced $1 billion to support for 30 by 30. And for us, one of the most exciting things over the last 3 months has been to work together with other philanthropists, 8 other philanthropists, all of whom want to respond to this moment, all of whom want to take away the barriers that are preventing us going over that tipping point. And it's been quite inspiring, quite honestly, dealing with some philanthropists that have really been working in this area for a long time. And they've come forward and said, we want to respond to this moment. And we will double the amount of finance we are going to put into conservation, preservation, and protection of nature. And as President Duque said, we are announcing today $5 billion from 9 philanthropists. And we hope that others will join, by the way, as we move forward. And the question is, why is this happening now? Well, it's because we are starting to see what we call an ambition loop. An ambition loop is when the different players reinforce each other and the whole starts adding up to more than the sum of the parts. So we look here today and see political leadership. And my goodness me, how fantastic. President Alvarado, President Duque, and Prime Minister Solberg. I mean, what a magnificent trio, if you like. We had breakfast today. And hearing them not only talk about their own commitment, but talking about a new way of doing nature protection. Not a top-down way, a way that honors local communities and indigenous people, a way that thinks about how the economy relates to all of this, a way that has a vision for an economy in the 2020s, 2030s, and 2040s, and has a sort of long-term approach to sustainability. So these are profoundly exciting times. And let me just commit to you on behalf of all of my friends in this coalition that we have created today, to work with you, support you, engage with you. Thank you.
Andrew, congratulations to all who have stepped up. And I think to those who have walked the journey of trying to bring finance to conservation, to nature, this is a moment of changing gears. I mean, if we think back that governments for the better part of the 90s and early 2000s managed to come up with $3 to $4 billion every 4 years for a global environment facility, I think it just shows what a significant ambition loop perhaps is now emerging. And obviously, as you said, the way that one can deploy that level of financing now in concert with governments, but also with communities, as you said. I think this is probably going to be one of the great challenges, where I'm going to turn to James Deutsch right now, who is the CEO of the Rainforest Trust, to also perhaps speak for a moment to how you as Rainforest Trust combine that responsibility to bring finance to advance conservation, nature-based solutions, but keep people in the center of that rather than outside of it. James, over to you.
Thanks so much, Achim. It's an honor to be here under the leadership of the 3 heads of state and as part of this extraordinary coalition for $5 billion. Let me address both of those questions, the financial commitment and the role of indigenous people and local people. Rainforest Trust is honored to pledge $500 million over the next 10 years to support local communities, indigenous peoples, and community groups to create and expand protected areas and other effective conservation, area-based conservation measures. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's actually been our mission since 1988, but the urgency has only increased. And thank heaven, our donors, mostly concerned individuals, have risen to the occasion and enabled us to make this pledge. Developing countries such as Colombia and Costa Rica have led the way in pledging to expand protected areas, and also globally in supporting the High Ambition Coalition and urging the rest of the world to join on to this 30 by 30 pledge. But this requires financial support. And while a few wealthy countries like Norway are in this room and stepping up to this challenge, many others are not yet. Private money, as Andrew was saying, is not a replacement for that. Private money, like the $5 billion pledged here, can do two things. First, as Andrew said, private money can act fast and do conservation now, and that's critical given the urgency of the biodiversity and health and climate crisis we all face. But also, private money can challenge the public sector to match and step up to the plate, which is where the real finance has to come from, and that's a critical role too. Let me turn to your second question, which was the role of indigenous people and local groups. Do you want to rephrase it, or I just go?
No, go ahead. Just to say 1 minute, please, because I'm getting signals.
Please, sorry. Well, I was just talking last week to one of our implementing partners on the ground in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And they told me that the communities that they deal with are pleading for their forests to be protected because they know that when outsiders come in and they log and they mine, the people who were there first get nothing. They lose out. And that's why, for example, in that country, all the projects we are doing are supporting indigenous and local groups and community reserves and forests. Going forward, we pledge that half of all the investment that we make will be specifically for indigenous land titling and other systems of gaining ownership and management authority for local and indigenous groups. Where governments and local groups want to expand traditional protected areas, as in Colombia, we will require independent verification of free prior informed consent. And every single project we fund will have a livelihood component to benefit local people, whether it's through tourism or carbon or integrated development assistance.
And James, I commend you for that because I think prior informed consent is something that indigenous peoples have been advocating for a long time. And as we know, sometimes in national development planning, an indigenous community's perspective on the forest comes last in the rating of priorities or criteria. So I commend you for that. Excuse me if I quickly move on to Zdenka Piskulich, who is the Managing Director of Enduring Earth. And again, to you perhaps also, Zdenka, the question, so commitment to the 30 by 30. Now that's a top-down target. So how do you, with Enduring Earth, combine that ambition to drive, so to speak, a conservation and nature-based solutions objective with the people on the ground who actually have to make it happen?
Yes, thank you. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate all the leaders here today for their unprecedented financial commitments, and especially for their passion for nature. And also say that this is an opportunity not only to bring in much needed financial resources, but above all, to deliver a message of hope. And I'd like to personally speak to what hope means in my case in the work that I've done. In a lot of the work that I've done in Costa Rica in the past, I have met people who have inspired me, who have used this opportunity of nature to be able to actually build new opportunities and to break the cycle of poverty, such as Estela in a protected area created by President Alvarado in Bahia Santa Elena, who was actually able to start her own family in, and by doing so was able to break the cycle of poverty for her family. I think that that's really important, and it speaks to the message of hope. And what this means is that effective conservation is not only about the power to protect biodiversity, but also to support livelihoods. And that is the ambition of Enduring Earth. And Enduring Earth is a global collaboration between the Nature Conservancy, the Pew Charitable Trusts, World Wildlife Fund, and private philanthropists and investors Ben and Luciana Walton. And what we aim to do is to protect conservation at scale. And to do this by using a proven model, which is called Project Finance for Permanence. This Project Finance for Permanence, or PFP, what it does is bring to the table communities, indigenous leaders, private philanthropists, public funding, governments, to work together, to think differently about how to achieve permanent conservation through use of long-term financial planning and also policy coherence. And I can speak to the power of Project Finance for Permanence because we have used it in Costa Rica over the past 10 years through Forever Costa Rica. And through Forever Costa Rica, over the past 10 years, we've been able to mobilize both public and private funds to secure our nation's rich biodiversity and at the same time to help many people like Estela break the cycles of poverty. And what we aim to do now is to actually expand this effort. This has been already used in 5 countries in the past and has been able to secure over $1.5 billion in resources that have been used to protect over 93 million hectares. Now our mission is to extend this to 20 countries. And by doing so, protect 500 million hectares by 2030. We will be securing $2 billion in the next 5 years that will help leverage an additional $4 billion by 2030.
And here, Zdenka, I have to give room for applause, but I also have to stop you for a moment because we may otherwise drive inflation out there in the economy with these announcements that are happening today, right? Can I just say, I have to unfortunately bring this panel to an end. I truly apologize because it is such a remarkable set of insights and messages and announcements that we're hearing this morning. But, you know, there is a world out there, and sometimes in this virtual world, shorter events have the power of reaching more people. So I think that was the organizer's idea. So let me first of all thank all the panelists for coming and joining us here this morning, for the work that you do as leaders, for the ideas that you continue to drive, and above all, you know, as somebody who works in the United Nations, what Zdenka just said, you know, we have the General Assembly week here right now, and the Secretary General said something on Monday that I think is extremely important. This is not a moment where we should not have hope. This is also not a moment of helplessness. It's a moment where people with ideas and the means to do something about what happens next have an opportunity to join forces and to do so together. Be it governments that have a critical role to play in the financing of nature and nature-based solutions, be it philanthropy, be it leaders from our community who have been fortunate in their lives and are now, in a sense, investing back into the community. At the center of all of this, I think we all know people will have to be the ones who shape what happens next. And I know that in this panel this morning, I think all our viewers could hear both the lessons and experience of life, but also a commitment to putting people at the center of these efforts, because nature without people is perhaps something good for biodiversity, but then we wouldn't have to worry about it because people were not part of the equation. So in that sense, thank you so much. Thank you also to the organizers. And Mosonda, buongiorno, or good afternoon to you in Rome, I hope. And back to you. I know you have trouble in now making up for the time. Thank you so much. And again, thank you to the panelists. Thank you.
So very much, Achim, and the panelists. Whoa, what amazing announcements there, and just listening in